Welcome back to the Sleepy Poker Masterclass, Beginner to Master. In this 14th lesson, we study multi-level thinking, the mental process that separates intuition from mastery. You'll learn how to understand not just what you hold, but what your opponent thinks you hold. By exploring levels of thought and perception, we reveal how elite players anticipate reactions, control narrative, and turn psychology into structured advantage. Chapter 1. Defining multi-level thinking. Multi-level thinking describes the structured process of analyzing poker decisions across layers of perception. At its foundation, it means understanding not just your cards, but how your opponents think about their cards and what they believe you represent. Each level adds depth, revealing how human logic, psychology, and adaptation shape decision-making. At the first level, players consider only their own hand. This is where all poker begins. The second level expands awareness to the opponent's possible holdings. The third level moves further, what they think you hold, and the fourth asks how they will respond based on that perception. Each step adds complexity, but also power. Multi-level thinking is not an abstract theory. It is a practical framework for reading situations more clearly. When applied correctly, it improves accuracy in both bluffing and value betting. It allows you to design lines of play that anticipate reactions before they occur. The process transforms poker from a game of cards into a game of decisions. However, deeper thinking is not always better. Many players make the mistake of over-leveling, assigning advanced logic to opponents who are not thinking beyond basic hand strength. The art lies in aligning your level of analysis with that of your opponent. You must think just one step ahead, never five. Professional players use multi-level thinking intuitively. They assess information, evaluate perception, and choose strategies that exploit cognitive mismatches. A strong player can recognize when an opponent is trapped at a single thought level and manipulate their perception accordingly. The structure of multi-level thinking mirrors the evolution of poker skill itself. Beginners see cards, intermediates see hands, professionals see minds. Each level you master expands control, allowing you to shape both your own story and the reactions of others. Multi-level thinking turns every decision into a conversation of logic and psychology. It is how strategy becomes prediction, and how understanding becomes advantage. Chapter 2. Level 1. Your own cards. Level 1 thinking is the foundation of all poker. At this stage, a player's decisions are guided entirely by their own hand strength. The focus is on absolute value, pairs, draws, and made hands, without consideration of what opponents might hold or how they interpret actions. Beginners naturally operate at this level. Their logic is direct. Strong hands bet, weak hands fold, and medium hands call. This simplicity creates predictability, which skilled players exploit easily. However, understanding this level remains essential, because every decision begins here. At level 1, the primary goal is to learn hand selection, position, and basic betting logic. You evaluate your cards in isolation and make decisions based on static outcomes. While limited in scope, this stage builds discipline and mechanical consistency. Even experienced players must return to level 1 occasionally. In high-pressure situations or after emotional swings, fundamentals provide stability. By recalibrating decisions around actual hand value, you reset your process and avoid overthinking. Recognizing level 1 thinkers at the table is crucial for exploitation. These players rarely bluff and often reveal hand strength through action size or timing. They chase visible value and fold frequently to aggression. Against them, you can bluff liberally, control pot size, and force mistakes through pressure. Level 1 is not a weakness, it is a step. All higher-level thinking is built upon it. Before understanding perception, you must understand value. Before constructing range narratives, you must master fundamentals. Every professional once operated entirely at this level. What separates them from beginners is awareness of its limits. They see the same cards but understand the broader conversation those cards initiate. Poker mastery begins with the simplicity of your own hand and grows outward. Level 1 is the anchor that keeps complexity grounded in logic. Without it, higher levels lose structure and clarity. Chapter 3, Level 2, Opponent Awareness. Level 2 thinking begins when a player shifts perspective from self to opponent. At this stage, you are no longer focused solely on your own cards, but on what your opponent might hold. This marks the transition from mechanical play to strategic thought. The goal of Level 2 is inference. You start observing behavior, timing, and bet sizing to narrow down your opponent's range. Instead of reacting emotionally to cards or outcomes, you begin constructing logical narratives based on probability and observation. Every action, check, raise, or fold, reveals information that helps define what your opponent's range might look like. Players operating at this level evaluate hands not in isolation, but in relation to others. For example, a bet on a coordinated board may represent a strong draw or made hand. A check in position may suggest weakness or deception. Understanding these patterns builds the foundation for counterplay. Level 2 also introduces counterfactual reasoning, considering what hands your opponent would take specific actions with. You learn to visualize possibilities rather than fixed answers. The more accurately you map these possibilities, the more effectively you can exploit imbalance. However, awareness alone is not enough. Many players at this level fall into the trap of assumption, believing their read is certain rather than probable. The key is maintaining humility. Poker decisions are made under uncertainty, and every conclusion must allow for error. Recognizing Level 2 thinkers at the table changes your approach. They analyze betting patterns, but may still reveal their own intentions too clearly. Against them, controlled deception works well. Mix strong hands into checking ranges, and bluffs into small bets to distort perception. Level 2 represents the foundation of reading opponents. It transforms poker from a contest of hands into a contest of information. By understanding others, you gain the power to shape how they understand you. Chapter 4, Level 3, What They Think You Have. Level 3 thinking moves beyond reading opponents. Here, you enter the realm of perception management, understanding how your opponents interpret your actions and what they believe about your range. At this level, poker becomes a dialogue of images rather than cards. Every bet and check sends a signal. Your opponent reads those signals to estimate hand strength. Level 3 thinking anticipates that process. You ask not only what do they have, but what do they think I have? Once you understand that, you can manipulate it. For instance, when you continuation bet after raising pre-flop, your opponent expects certain hand types, strong aces, broadways, or high pairs. Checking back on a dry flop may suggest weakness, while a delayed turn bet might appear opportunistic. By predicting these interpretations, you can choose actions that mislead. This level introduces strategic storytelling. You begin crafting narratives that opponents willingly believe. Bluffing becomes more about credibility than courage. If your story matches their expectations, they fold even strong hands. If your actions contradict logic, they call light out of suspicion. Level 3 also deepens your understanding of table image. Over time, opponents build memory of your tendencies: tight, aggressive, cautious, or deceptive. That memory shapes how they interpret your future moves. Professionals exploit this memory by shifting behavior subtly, leading opponents to draw the wrong conclusions. However, thinking at this level demands control. Overemphasis on perception can lead to self-conscious play or paralysis by analysis. You must maintain balance between manipulation and consistency. Each deception should have purpose rooted in logic, not impulse. Mastering Level 3 transforms poker into narrative control. You are no longer reacting to the game, you are directing it. Every action tells a deliberate story, designed to evoke a calculated response. When you understand not just what they think, but how they think, you take command of the conversation that defines poker itself. Chapter 5. Level 4. Anticipating Counterplay. Level 4 thinking represents the threshold of advanced strategic awareness. It is the point where you anticipate not only what your opponent believes, but how they will react to that belief. This is the level where adjustment becomes prediction, and poker evolves into a full psychological dialogue. At this stage, you assume your opponent recognizes your strategy. They know how you think, and they may attempt to counter it. Your task is to anticipate their response to your apparent narrative and stay one step ahead. For example, if you have been continuation betting frequently, your opponent may start raising flops as a counter. Recognizing this shift, you can respond by tightening your range or setting traps with strong hands. Level 4 is rooted in foresight. Instead of reacting to aggression or pressure, you prepare for it. You design plays that profit from the very counters your opponents attempt. Each move becomes a layered exchange of logic and perception, unfolding like a chess sequence. Professional players rely on this process constantly. They recognize when opponents are adapting and use that adaptation against them. When an observant opponent adjusts to perceived bluff frequency, the professional transitions seamlessly into value-heavy lines, punishing overcorrection. However, Level 4 thinking demands restraint. Overestimating your opponent's sophistication can lead to unnecessary complexity. Many players believe they are being countered when, in reality, the opponent is still playing basic strategy. True mastery comes from matching depth appropriately. Always think one level deeper than your opponent, never more. Emotion control is vital here. Confidence can morph into overanalysis under stress. Professionals stay grounded by using logic as an anchor, verifying each assumption with behavioral or statistical evidence before acting. Anticipating counterplay defines the highest tier of functional thought in poker. Beyond this, leveling loses practical value. The strongest players know when to simplify, when to anticipate, and when to let opponents trap themselves through assumption. Level 4 is not about infinite thought, it is about clarity. It shows how awareness, preparation, and precision merge into one unified strategy that anticipates response and turns counterplay into opportunity. Chapter 6. The Infinite Loop of Thinking. Multi-level thinking can theoretically continue forever. Each player considers what the other thinks about what they think, layering perspective upon perspective. In theory, there is no limit. In practice, there is. The concept of the infinite loop of thinking illustrates why most players must stop at a functional depth to remain effective. Beyond level 4, decision-making becomes abstract and inefficient. You start imagining possibilities disconnected from reality. Thoughts like, "He knows that I know that he knows," quickly spiral into uncertainty, consuming time and focus. The result is paralysis, where overthinking replaces clear execution. The best players recognize when the loop becomes unproductive. They simplify decisions back to fundamentals: range, position, stack size, and pot odds. These tangible anchors prevent emotional fatigue and maintain structure. Advanced logic is only useful when grounded in measurable information. The infinite loop also highlights a critical psychological truth: opponents are not perfect thinkers. They make emotional choices, misread signals, and base reactions on incomplete data. Assuming flawless reasoning in others is a mistake. The goal is to identify where their logic ends, not to build imaginary layers beyond it. Awareness of this limitation improves efficiency. Rather than chasing infinite depth, professionals develop accuracy at specific levels. They calibrate intuition to recognize when an opponent operates on level 1 or 2 and adapt accordingly. Poker rewards correct calibration more than intellectual excess. Controlling the loop also helps emotional balance. Overthinking often stems from anxiety, the desire to predict every outcome. Learning to trust disciplined structure replaces fear with confidence. Once your process becomes systematic, you no longer need infinite thought, you simply follow clear logic. The infinite loop teaches humility. Even the best players misread situations when trapped in mental complexity. Mastery lies not in endless analysis, but in knowing exactly when to stop. Chapter 7: Common Leveling Mistakes. Multi-level thinking adds depth to poker, but it also creates opportunities for misjudgment. Many players fall into predictable errors when trying to think multiple steps ahead. Recognizing these mistakes and correcting them early preserves both clarity and profit. The first mistake is over-leveling. This occurs when a player assumes their opponent is thinking at a higher level than they truly are. They interpret simple actions as elaborate traps or assume complex logic where only instinct exists. The result is unnecessary folding or misplaced aggression. Strong players align their thought depth to the opponent's capability, not their own imagination. Another mistake is ego-driven leveling. Players often overcomplicate hands to showcase intelligence or creativity. They abandon solid fundamentals to pursue advanced ideas that sound sophisticated but collapse under scrutiny. True expertise is quiet. It simplifies where others exaggerate. Emotional bias also distorts multi-level thought. After losing a key pot, players may assume opponents are targeting them specifically, creating artificial depth. This reactive thinking leads to defensive mistakes. Calm awareness restores perspective, allowing strategy to return to logic instead of emotion. Poor information use is another frequent error. Some players rely too heavily on perceived tells or recent patterns without considering broader trends. A single observation may not justify deep leveling unless supported by multiple data points. Professionals test every assumption through repetition before adapting fully. Overconfidence in reads can create blind spots. A player who believes they know exactly what an opponent is doing may ignore alternative explanations. The best thinkers maintain probability-based reasoning, acknowledging that every hand exists within a range, not certainty. Finally, timing errors magnify these mistakes. Excessive leveling often slows play, giving away hesitation and intention. Controlled pacing communicates confidence and avoids exposing overanalysis. The goal of multi-level thinking is precision, not complexity. Each level should add clarity, not confusion. Professionals refine their thought depth until it matches the environment perfectly. One step ahead, no more. By avoiding these common errors, your reasoning remains grounded, efficient, and strategically sound. Chapter 8: The Role of Range Construction. Range construction is the backbone of multi-level thinking. Without structured ranges, layered thought collapses into guesswork. Understanding how your range interacts with your opponents allows you to think across levels, logically rather than emotionally. At its core, range construction means assigning logical combinations of hands to every action: open, call, raise, or fold. Each range represents a spectrum of potential strength, blending value, draws, and bluffs. When your range is coherent, your actions tell a consistent story that supports higher-level analysis. Multi-level thinking relies on that consistency. At level 2, you estimate your opponent's range. At level 3, you predict what they believe your range contains. Without disciplined construction, those assumptions break down. Random or inconsistent ranges create conflicting signals that smart opponents exploit easily. Balanced ranges serve as communication tools. They tell a believable story, regardless of the actual cards. For example, when you continuation bet on an ace-high board after raising pre-flop, your range naturally contains many top pairs and strong draws. Because this line makes sense, your opponent's response becomes predictable, and therefore exploitable. Range awareness also limits over-leveling. By grounding analysis in combinations and equity, you prevent emotional interpretation from distorting judgment. You no longer guess what someone might be thinking. Instead, you measure their likely frequencies and compare them to expected values. Professionals build ranges with both structure and flexibility. Pre-flop charts provide foundation, but adjustments follow real-time observation. A range against a tight player differs from one against a loose, aggressive field. Maintaining adaptability keeps your strategy relevant without sacrificing discipline. Constructing coherent ranges also protects against imbalance. Even when bluffing or trapping, your actions remain consistent with previous lines. This logical harmony ensures that multi-level reasoning operates within boundaries opponents cannot easily decipher. Range construction turns perception into calculation. It converts intuition into data, ensuring that every level of thought rests on measurable logic. The deeper your range understanding, the more confidently you can navigate complex psychological exchanges. Chapter 9: Psychological Cues and Traps. Psychology enhances multi-level thinking by revealing how behavior reflects intention. Every motion at the table, how chips are stacked, how quickly someone acts, or how they breathe, communicates something about comfort or anxiety. Understanding these cues allows you to interpret the story your opponent presents, and more importantly, to write your own. Psychological cues operate on two levels: involuntary and intentional. Involuntary cues arise from emotion, tension, relief, or fear. Intentional cues are signals players send deliberately, hoping to influence perception. Strong players read both, but react cautiously, verifying patterns over time rather than trusting single incidents. Common involuntary cues include shallow breathing during bluffs, stiffness when holding strong hands, or nervous chip handling after large bets. These patterns vary by individual, but emotional contrast is reliable. A player who normally moves fluidly, but freezes after betting often indicates strength. Intentional cues create traps. Experienced players act weak when strong, and strong when weak. They may sigh before betting big, or shrug after a call to appear uncertain. Recognizing deliberate misdirection requires comparison between baseline behavior and current deviation. Professionals watch for consistency. Anything unnatural signals a possible act. However, reading cues is not infallible. Cultural differences, fatigue, or random habits can mislead even skilled observers. The safest method is to use behavioral information as supporting evidence rather than proof. Confirm tells through repeated observation and integrate them only when aligned with logical range analysis. Psychological traps extend beyond physical behavior. Betting rhythm, table talk, and timing create perception control. A player who always bets quickly with bluffs, but hesitates with value, hands can be manipulated through pacing reversals. Professionals design their timing deliberately to elicit predictable reactions. At higher levels, deception becomes symmetrical. You set traps while expecting your opponent to set theirs. Multi-level thinking merges psychology and logic into one structure, actions that appear natural but carry hidden intent. The goal is not to outsmart every opponent with theatrics, but to manage perception quietly. The calmest players create the most confusion because their demeanor never reveals level or motive. In poker, the best psychological trap is composure itself. Chapter 10: Simplifying Complexity. Advanced strategy introduces depth, but too much analysis can become counterproductive. Simplifying complexity ensures that multi-level thinking remains practical, not paralyzing. Professionals maintain focus by reducing variables to those that matter most: position, range interaction, and opponent type. Simplification begins with structure. Before each hand, define a clear process. Assess stack depth, identify range advantage, and plan action sequences. This routine eliminates decision fatigue and prevents thought loops. Once the framework is automatic, deeper analysis fits neatly inside it, without overwhelming you. Prioritization follows. Not every situation requires multi-level reasoning. Against level 1 opponents who play cards literally, simple strategies outperform complex traps. Reserve higher-level thought for opponents who demonstrate awareness. Efficiency, not excess, produces consistency. Another aspect of simplification is clarity of purpose. Every action should have intent. If you cannot explain why you are betting, calling, or checking, the move lacks direction. Professionals treat each decision as a function of equity, position, or image, not impulse. Visualization helps manage complexity. Thinking in terms of ranges and textures, rather than isolated hands, streamlines logic. Instead of debating endless possibilities, you narrow decisions to structured categories, strong, medium, or weak holdings, and apply appropriate frequencies. Emotional control complements simplification. Overanalysis often stems from fear of making a mistake or missing subtle cues. Accepting uncertainty frees mental space for logical execution. Poker is a game of probability, not certainty. Professionals act confidently within that boundary. Simplifying does not mean playing shallowly. It means refining thought to its most useful components. You retain depth, but remove clutter. The more disciplined your process, the faster and clearer your reasoning becomes. In multi-level thinking, simplicity is strength. Complexity without clarity leads to chaos, but clarity within complexity leads to mastery. Chapter 11: Exploitative Use of Levels. Multi-level thinking becomes most powerful when used for exploitation. By understanding how opponents perceive the game, you can manipulate their assumptions to create profitable reactions. Exploitative use of levels is not about deception for its own sake, but about targeting the cognitive limits of your opponent's reasoning. Each opponent operates at a different depth of thought. Some focus only on their cards, while others analyze ranges, perception, and counterplay. Exploitation begins by identifying that depth accurately. Once you know the level they think on, you design your actions to appear consistent with their expectations, while guiding them toward predictable mistakes. Against level 1 players, straightforward aggression is most effective. They interpret bets literally, folding weak hands and calling with strength. Bluffing succeeds through volume and pressure, while complex misdirection is unnecessary. Against level 2 players, who think about your range, exploitation shifts towards storytelling. You can shape your line to misrepresent hand strength, creating a believable narrative that encourages errors. For instance, checking a strong hand in position against a cautious opponent may induce bluffs that you can easily call. At level 3 and beyond, manipulation becomes more subtle. These players consider what you want them to believe. To exploit them, you alternate between genuine and false signals, forcing uncertainty. A well-timed deviation from pattern, like an unexpected large river bet after a passive line, creates confusion that breaks their confidence in range prediction. Exploitative use of levels requires control. Each deviation must have purpose, rooted in observation. Overuse of manipulation leads to self-contradiction and predictability. Professionals employ subtlety, blending authentic and deceptive actions, until opponents lose reference points entirely. Psychological balance enhances this process. A calm demeanor and consistent rhythm mask your intent, making deception appear natural. The goal is not to outthink opponents endlessly, but to make them think in the wrong direction. When multi-level exploitation is executed correctly, every move serves dual purpose: truth for yourself and illusion for others. Poker becomes less about guessing and more about guiding. You do not simply read minds, you write the script they follow. Chapter 12. Defensive leveling. Defensive leveling protects you from opponents who think deeply or exploit perception aggressively. Just as you use multi-level thought to mislead others, strong players attempt to manipulate your understanding. Defensive leveling ensures that awareness becomes armor, not a trap. The first step is recognition. Notice when opponents begin adapting. Frequent adjustments in their aggression, bet sizing, or timing often indicate awareness of your strategy. Once you sense their focus shifting toward perception, tighten your structure. Return to balanced ranges and theoretical stability to minimize exploitability. Defensive leveling relies on control of image. Presenting consistency limits how much information opponents can use against you. Avoid emotional reactions, sudden tempo changes, or exaggerated physical behavior that reveals frustration or excitement. The more predictable your composure, the less access they have to manipulate it. Balanced frequency is key. Maintaining GTO-inspired ratios of bluffs and value hands prevents your strategy from becoming transparent. Even if opponents analyze deeply, they cannot find clear weaknesses. Balance neutralizes their attempts to overthink. Another defensive tactic is range protection through reverse actions. Occasionally checking strong hands or calling with medium ones disrupts expected patterns. These variations prevent advanced opponents from narrowing your range precisely, forcing them into uncertainty. Avoid the temptation to fight back through unnecessary complexity. Defensive leveling is not escalation. It is simplification under pressure, stabilizing strategy, while opponents entangle themselves in assumptions. When in doubt, revert to logic, position and range fundamentals. Mental calmness enhances defense. Emotional responses create patterns just as clearly as betting habits. Professionals practice neutral expression and measured pacing to eliminate readable contrast between strength and weakness. Defensive leveling is less about deception and more about discipline. It means refusing to be drawn into psychological warfare on unfavorable terms. You control what opponents can see and what they must guess. When executed properly, defensive leveling transforms pressure into opportunity. The more others try to outthink you, the more they reveal their own confusion. True composure turns advanced opponents into their own worst enemy. Chapter 13. Adjusting levels by player type. Multi-level thinking is most effective when tailored to the player in front of you. Different player types operate at different depths of reasoning, and applying the wrong level of thought can create self-inflicted mistakes. The art lies in recognizing how each opponent thinks, and adjusting your level just one step beyond theirs. Recreational players generally operate on level 1. They focus on the strength of their own hand, and react literally to visible board texture. Against them, simplicity wins. Avoid advanced bluffs or complex narratives. Instead, apply straightforward aggression with strong hands and occasional well-timed bluffs that exploit fear of loss. Regular players usually think at level 2. They evaluate your possible range and adapt moderately to table dynamics. These opponents respect consistency and respond predictably to pressure. Exploit them by varying your range balance slightly. Show strength when they expect weakness and vice versa. Consistent observation reveals when they overreact to perceived imbalance. Elite opponents, those comfortable at level 3 or higher, analyze perception itself. They consider how you appear and how they can manipulate your understanding. Against them, leveling wars begin. To stay ahead, alternate between equilibrium play and targeted deviation. GTO stability protects you when unsure, while timely exploitation punishes predictable counterplay. Each player type also carries emotional tendencies. Recreational players value experience and excitement, regulars value order and logic, and professionals value control and precision. Tailoring your tone and rhythm to each group enhances psychological leverage. Quiet patience unsettles emotional opponents. Deliberate unpredictability confuses analytical ones. Adaptation should remain fluid. If an opponent begins adjusting successfully, reduce complexity. Revert to level 2 fundamentals until stability returns. The strongest players switch between strategic depth levels seamlessly, responding to opponent awareness like a mirror reflecting perception. Adjusting levels by player type turns strategy into calibration. It is less about thinking infinitely and more about targeting effectively. Each opponent sets the depth of the game. Your advantage comes from setting it slightly deeper and no more. Chapter 14. Leveling in live versus online play. The environment of poker dictates how multi-level thinking functions. Live and online settings create different forms of information, timing, and perception. Understanding how to adapt your leveling to each environment ensures consistent accuracy regardless of format. In live poker, physical presence introduces behavioral data, body language, breathing, tone, and pacing. Players reveal emotion unconsciously, offering insight into confidence or discomfort. Live leveling includes reading these cues and projecting controlled behavior to shape how others interpret your actions. Table image builds over hours, giving experienced players the ability to manipulate expectation gradually. Conversely, online poker eliminates physical tells, but replaces them with numerical precision. Timing patterns, bet sizing trends, and statistical profiles become the new language of perception. Multi-level thinking online relies on database analysis and population tendencies rather than human observation. The absence of emotional signals makes mathematical discipline essential. Live games favor psychological exploitation. Opponents often react to perceived dominance, fatigue, or personality. Professionals in live settings use calm composure and pacing variation to influence these reactions deliberately. Every sigh, delay, or casual remark becomes a tool for directing perception. Online play favors technical balance. With fewer emotional signals, deception must occur through frequency control and sizing logic. The strongest online players construct mixed strategies that appear unpredictable over large samples, avoiding exploitable patterns in databases or tracking software. Adaptation speed also differs. In live poker, image changes slowly because hands per hour are limited. Online, hundreds of hands occur per session, allowing rapid recognition of imbalance. Professionals exploit this by making temporary adjustments online that would take hours to establish live. Despite these contrasts, the principles remain identical. You still think about what others believe, adjust your level to their awareness, and manage perception deliberately. The difference lies in the medium: psychology in live play, data in online play. Mastering both environments completes strategic versatility. Live skill builds intuition and composure. Online skill refines balance and precision. Multi-level thinking thrives when both disciplines merge into one seamless system of logic, awareness, and adaptability. Chapter 15: Tournament Leveling Dynamics. Tournament poker adds unique layers to multi-level thinking. Unlike cash games, tournaments evolve continuously. Stack sizes, blind pressure, and payout structures force players to change their decision-making depth as conditions shift. Understanding these dynamics allows you to apply the right level of thought at the right moment. Early in tournaments, stacks are deep and players are loose. Level 1 and Level 2 thinking dominate. Most opponents focus on their own cards or simple reads. This is the time for disciplined fundamentals and cautious observation. Bluffing rarely succeeds because opponents are too willing to gamble. The strongest strategy is structure: build image, track tendencies, and prepare for later exploitation. As blinds rise and stacks shrink, perception becomes more important. Players start to consider not only what they have, but how others view them. Level 3 thinking begins to appear. Professionals use this stage to manipulate table image. A few visible showdowns, whether tight or aggressive, shape how opponents interpret your actions in future hands. Near the money bubble, leveling accelerates. Fear of elimination causes many players to revert to Level 1, folding excessively. Exploit this by applying pressure through frequent opens and continuation bets. Against stronger opponents who anticipate this, adjust further, pretend to attack, then tighten to catch their counterbluffs. At final tables, advanced leveling peaks. Short stacks defend narrowly, big stacks pressure everyone, and mid-stacks face conflicting incentives. Reading how each player interprets risk becomes essential. Some view survival as priority, others chase chip leadership. Multi-level thinking here involves anticipating those emotional priorities and shaping strategy around them. Tournament dynamics also reward self-control. Fatigue and pressure distort reasoning, often reducing sophisticated players to reactive behavior. The ability to maintain clear, layered thought under stress is what separates champions from survivors. In tournaments, leveling is not constant, it flows with the structure. Recognizing when to think deeply and when to simplify preserves focus and maximizes equity. Chapter 16: Cash Game Leveling Dynamics. Cash games, by contrast, create a steady environment where stack depths remain constant and pressure is self-imposed. Multi-level thinking here revolves around consistency, adaptation, and long-term psychological balance. Without the urgency of elimination, leveling develops gradually through repeated interaction and memory. Because players face each other across countless hands, image and perception evolve more slowly but more deeply. Regular opponents remember tendencies and adjust over time. This continuity allows extended leveling wars, where every adjustment becomes part of an ongoing dialogue. At lower stakes, most players remain fixed at level 1 or 2. Exploitation is straightforward. Apply pressure where fear dominates, and restraint where curiosity leads to mistakes. As stakes rise, more players think at level 3 or beyond, requiring subtle deception and range management. Cash game leveling also centers on rhythm. Timing, bet sizing, and pacing create impressions that accumulate over sessions. A player who always continuation bets may suddenly check a strong hand to appear weak, setting up future traps. Professionals use these sequences deliberately, engineering situations where opponents misread patterns they've come to trust. Deep stacks increase complexity. Multi-street planning allows for layered deception, where level 4 anticipation thrives. You can design lines that appear exploitable early, but reverse perception on later streets. This depth of planning separates theoretical understanding from true mastery. However, because cash games allow unlimited re-entry, emotional control becomes more critical than structure. Tilt creates predictable leveling breakdowns. Recognizing emotional cues in opponents and preventing them in yourself preserves strategic clarity across long sessions. Unlike tournaments, cash leveling has no endpoint. Each session blends into the next, making memory and consistency as important as logic. Professionals use history as both weapon and shield, remembering every revealed hand and how each opponent reacted to pressure. Multi-level thinking in cash games reflects endurance rather than escalation. The game never resets, so discipline replaces urgency. Mastery comes not from brilliance in a single hand, but from balanced perception sustained over time. Chapter 17: Bluffing Across Levels. Bluffing is where multi-level thinking becomes most visible. Each level of thought changes how bluffs are perceived and when they succeed. Understanding how to align bluff frequency and credibility with your opponent's perception is the key to consistent execution. At level 1, bluffing rarely works. Players who focus only on their cards call too often, ignoring logic and probability. Bluffing against them wastes equity. The correct approach is patience. Bet your strong hands, and let their curiosity fund your winnings. At level 2, bluffs become more powerful. These players consider what you might hold, so you can represent strength effectively. Consistent continuation bets and believable storylines pressure them to fold missed hands. The key is narrative consistency. Each action must make sense within your supposed range. At level 3, opponents evaluate your credibility. They think about what you want them to believe. Against them, bluffing becomes psychological chess. You must construct lines that appear intentionally misleading but still logical. For example, betting small on a draw-heavy flop and overbetting a blank river can create confusion. They know you are capable of trickery, but cannot determine when you are using it. Bluffing at level 4 involves anticipation. You predict how observant players will counter your perceived bluff frequency. If they start calling light, adjust by reducing bluffs and expanding value bets. This reversal converts their adaptation into your profit. The most successful bluffs are rooted in logic, not impulse. Professionals balance aggression with equity, choosing hands that can improve or block likely calls. They bluff less frequently, but with higher accuracy, using both range awareness and psychological control. Timing enhances credibility. Quick, confident execution conveys certainty. Hesitation or excess explanation undermines the illusion. The calmest players bluff most effectively because they appear identical in every situation. At its core, bluffing across levels is about storytelling. The narrative must align with what your opponent expects to see. When logic, behavior, and timing converge, your bluffs no longer rely on luck, they rely on belief. Chapter 18: Value Betting Through Levels. Value betting benefits equally from multi-level thought. While bluffing relies on persuasion, value betting depends on perception control, getting paid when you are ahead without revealing strength too early. The ability to extract maximum value from strong hands requires reading what your opponent believes about you. At level 1, value betting is straightforward. You bet your strong hands because opponents will call with weaker ones. The goal is clarity and volume, not deception. Against players who ignore range logic, simply bet for value and avoid slow play. At level 2, perception starts to matter. These opponents consider your possible range, so you must balance strength and subtlety. A large bet may scare them, while a small one invites calls. Adjust sizing to their tendencies, small against cautious players, large against curious ones. At level 3, value betting becomes a form of manipulation. Your opponents think about what you represent. You can induce calls by appearing weak or uncertain. Checking a turn with top set, or using a smaller river bet, may invite thin calls from players who overthink motives. Level 4 introduces anticipation. You predict how an aware opponent will react to your perceived patterns. If they expect you to trap, you bet boldly. If they expect large bets with value, you underbet to confuse them. Each adjustment is a response to how they interpret your image. Professionals maintain balance by blending value hands into deceptive lines. Occasional checks with strong holdings and thin bets with medium strength protect against overreading. This variation ensures opponents cannot anchor your behavior to specific strength ranges. Emotional control refines execution. Excitement or fear often leaks through timing or speech, signaling strength. The most skilled value bettors appear as calm betting a monster as they do holding air. Composure completes the illusion, maximizing return, while minimizing information. At its highest level, value betting is not about hand strength alone, but perception engineering. You design an image that invites mistakes. Each bet extracts not only chips but confidence, leaving opponents questioning what they truly saw. Chapter 19: Reverse Psychology and Trap Setting. Reverse psychology in poker transforms understanding into misdirection. Once opponents begin analyzing your behavior and reasoning, you can guide their conclusions intentionally. Trap setting is the deliberate use of controlled deception to make opponents act exactly as you want them to. The foundation of trapping lies in credibility. To deceive effectively, you must first play predictably. Opponents only fall for misdirection when they believe in the image you have built. If you have been aggressive for several orbits, a sudden check may invite bluffs. If you have been passive, a sharp raise gains more respect. Consistency creates context, and context sells the story. Trap setting thrives at higher levels of thought. Level 2 and 3 players are especially vulnerable because they think about perception, but still assume their interpretation is correct. Against them, subtle reversals, like slow playing strong hands or representing weakness through timing, produce maximum payoff. The most effective traps are designed with purpose, not ego. Many players attempt flashy traps that ignore risk, letting opponents realize free equity. True traps control pot size, maintain range balance, and trigger specific reactions. A check call on the turn followed by a river check can invite an overbet bluff from an opponent convinced of your weakness. Reverse psychology also works defensively. By showing controlled emotion or deliberate hesitation, you can disarm aggressive players who thrive on fear or dominance. Feigned uncertainty often encourages reckless attacks. Calmly absorbing pressure until the right moment allows you to spring the trap cleanly. However, overuse of traps creates predictability. Skilled opponents recognize passive lines repeated too often and adjust by checking back strong hands or betting smaller. Successful reverse psychology requires variation. Some checks hide strength, others represent genuine caution. Professionals treat traps as narrative tools. They write believable stories, then let opponents draw false conclusions. Every element, bat sizing, tone, rhythm, and timing, contributes to the illusion. When executed correctly, the opponent's own reasoning becomes the instrument of their defeat. The essence of reverse psychology is patience. You give opponents enough room to act while maintaining control of the outcome. Mastery lies in making deception invisible, letting logic, not theatrics, lead them directly into your plan. Chapter 20. Adapting to emotional leveling. Emotional leveling occurs when logic collides with feeling. Players influenced by emotion interpret the game differently, creating exploitable distortions in perception. Recognizing these emotional states and adapting your thought process around them ensures clarity when others lose control. Tilt, frustration, and ego are the most common emotional distortions. A tilted opponent may become reckless, chasing lost chips through impulsive bluffs. An ego-driven player resists folding to prove dominance. Both reveal clear opportunities for controlled exploitation. When facing emotionally compromised opponents, lower your thought depth. Advanced reasoning becomes unnecessary because emotion overrides logic. Focus on straightforward strategy. Tighten your range, value bet often, and allow them to make predictable mistakes. Emotional leveling also affects your own decisions. After a bad beat, your brain demands instant recovery. This reaction often leads to over-bluffing or poor call-downs. Professionals counter this by pausing between hands, taking deep breaths, and resetting their focus. Emotional regulation restores equilibrium before logic fades. Observation identifies emotional states through timing, speech, and rhythm. A player acting faster than usual, or staring intensely after losing a pot, is likely tilted. Calmly applying pressure, through consistent, logical play, exploits their volatility without risk. Ego leveling deserves special attention. Some players enter psychological duels, focusing on proving superiority rather than winning chips. Engaging them emotionally feeds the trap they set for themselves. The professional response is detachment. By refusing to participate in their emotional narrative, you control the pace and direction of the match. Fatigue also produces emotional leveling late in sessions or tournaments. Decision quality declines as mental energy fades. Professionals prepare through hydration, nutrition, and deliberate pacing to sustain composure when others falter. Ultimately, emotional leveling reminds us that poker is played by people, not machines. Logic must always adapt to emotion, both yours and theirs. The ability to stay rational while others unravel transforms technical skill into enduring advantage. Chapter 21. Metagame Awareness. Metagame awareness extends multi-level thinking beyond a single hand or session. It involves understanding how strategy evolves over time within a recurring player pool. The metagame is the collective memory of how you and your opponents have played, shaping future expectations and adjustments. At its core, metagame awareness is pattern recognition on a large scale. When opponents notice that you frequently bluff in certain spots, they begin to counter by calling lighter. Anticipating this response allows you to reverse course, reducing bluff frequency and increasing value betting. This constant evolution defines long-term adaptability. The metagame also influences emotional tone. Opponents develop psychological narratives about your style: tight, cautious, aggressive, or fearless. These narratives persist across sessions and events, affecting how your future actions are interpreted. Managing this narrative intentionally gives you long-term control over perception. Consistency builds credibility. If you maintain disciplined ranges and balanced play, opponents respect your decisions more deeply. Conversely, erratic behavior undermines your strategic image, encouraging lighter calls and reckless challenges. Professionals guard their metagame reputation carefully, knowing it dictates future profitability. Awareness of the broader environment matters too. Online platforms, live circuits, and local games each develop their own meta. Population tendencies shift as players learn, copy strategies, and respond to trends. Staying informed about these shifts keeps your approach current. What exploited players last year may fail against a more balanced field today. Metagame awareness also protects against stagnation. Many players plateau because they rely on outdated reads or habitual strategies. Professionals evolve continuously, reanalyzing their database of experiences to refine assumptions. The metagame becomes a living map of adaptation and counter-adaptation. This awareness turns poker into an ongoing dialogue rather than isolated hands. Every decision today shapes how opponents respond tomorrow. Thinking beyond the moment allows you to engineer future advantage deliberately. Metagame awareness represents mastery at scale, the ability to think not only within hands, but across time. The more consciously you manage that narrative, the more power you hold over the unseen rhythm of competition. Chapter 22. Table Image and Narrative Control. Table image is the real-time version of metagame awareness. It reflects what your opponents currently believe about you. Narrative control means managing that belief intentionally, crafting a story that serves your strategic goals. The best players never let image form by accident. They design it. Your image is shaped by visible patterns, frequency of aggression, showdown results, physical demeanor, and verbal tone. Each of these factors builds a reputation that influences how opponents respond. An image of tight discipline invites steals, while an image of recklessness encourages folds. Understanding this cause and effect allows you to use perception as a weapon. The first step in narrative control is consistency. Repeated actions establish expectation. Once that expectation solidifies, you can deviate from it for profit. For example, if opponents perceive you as cautious, a sudden bluff commands credibility. If they see you as wild, a large value bet invites payment from disbelief. Body language and timing contribute to narrative depth. Calm posture, steady movement, and measured pacing project confidence and reliability. Emotional restraint reinforces any story you choose to tell, whether that story is tight control or fearless aggression. The calm player owns the narrative because they dictate rhythm. Speech and behavior also shape image. Verbal interaction can relax or unsettle others, influencing their comfort level and decision-making. Professionals use conversation strategically, sometimes silent to project strength, sometimes talkative to appear casual or distract. Controlling image does not mean acting. It means aligning your behavior, tempo, and decisions into a coherent narrative that fits your plan. Inconsistency breaks the illusion. If your words, timing, and actions tell conflicting stories, opponents disengage from the trap. Narrative control extends across sessions. A memorable bluff or unconventional move lingers in opponents' minds, altering future reactions. Professionals leverage these memories deliberately, setting up future hands long before they occur. Your table image is always active, even when silent. Every action adds to the story opponents tell themselves. Mastering narrative control means becoming the author of that story. In poker, perception writes results, and clarity writes confidence. Chapter 23: Timing and Decision Flow. Timing is the invisible language of poker. Every pause, hesitation, or quick motion communicates information that shapes how others interpret your hand. Decision flow refers to how those timings connect across a hand, forming a rhythm that opponents unconsciously read. Mastering timing allows you to influence perception without saying a word. Every player develops a baseline rhythm. Some act quickly, others prefer deliberate pacing. Observant opponents learn these habits and draw conclusions from deviations. A sudden delay from a fast player often indicates uncertainty or a decision of real weight. A quick call from a normally methodical player can signal premeditation or strength. Professionals observe these timing shifts carefully, translating them into probability adjustments. Controlling your own timing is just as important. Consistency creates protection. Acting with a steady rhythm prevents opponents from gathering reliable data. Whether betting, folding, or raising, maintain measured pacing that blends into the background of play. This neutrality keeps your range concealed and reduces exploitable tells. Advanced players use timing as a subtle weapon. They understand how to adjust decision flow to reinforce desired perception. A quick continuation bet can project confidence, while a thoughtful pause before a large river bet can suggest vulnerability. Each choice influences how others frame the hand's story. Timing also governs internal rhythm. Structured pacing prevents emotional decisions. Taking a brief pause before every action creates distance between thought and impulse, allowing logic to dictate behavior. Professionals apply the same rhythm in both winning and losing streaks to remain emotionally balanced. Awareness of table tempo matters as well. The collective speed of play affects mental endurance and focus. By subtly controlling pace, slowing the game during critical moments, or accelerating it to maintain dominance, you influence both environment and opponent comfort. Decision flow extends beyond individual hands. Consistent timing across sessions builds image. If opponents believe your rhythm equals reliability, they become easier to manipulate when you deliberately break that pattern. Timing in poker is not about speed, it is about control. Every second communicates intent. When you own that rhythm, you command both the hand and the perception around it. Chapter 24. Real-world examples from professionals. Studying professional examples reveals how multi-level thinking functions in practice. Elite players demonstrate not only technical mastery, but also the psychological precision that defines advanced poker. Observing their approach translates theory into actionable understanding. Daniel Negreanu exemplifies layered perception. Known for verbal table talk and visible hand reading, he operates comfortably across multiple thought levels, simultaneously. He considers what his opponents believe about his range, adjusts his tone and timing accordingly, and often guides them into revealing information unconsciously. His strategy shows that communication and observation merge naturally when awareness is deliberate. Phil Ivey provides a contrasting model: silent, calculated, and unreadable. His composure strips opponents of emotional cues, forcing them to rely solely on logic. Ivey's power lies in controlled unpredictability. He creates pressure by remaining motionless, compelling others to interpret stillness as strength. His mastery of psychological neutrality defines level 4 anticipation, allowing opponents to mislead themselves. Justin Bonomo and Stephen Chidwick illustrate balance between solver-based structure and adaptive flexibility. They study equilibrium theory deeply, but deviate confidently when live dynamics change. Their consistency across formats proves that logic and emotion can coexist in harmony when guided by clear process. Fedor Holds represents modern precision. His emotional discipline and mindfulness techniques keep thought flow consistent across long sessions. By combining mental clarity with advanced theoretical knowledge, he executes complex strategies effortlessly under high-pressure conditions. These professionals share 3 defining traits. First, they manage perception intentionally. Every action, bet sizing, timing, and demeanor is calculated to shape opponent response. Second, they adapt continuously. They shift between levels based on opponent awareness, never thinking too far or too shallow. Third, they maintain composure. Emotional neutrality turns multi-level thought into stable execution. Studying these examples clarifies that mastery is not about complexity alone. It is about control, awareness, and deliberate adaptation. The best players think clearly, act consistently, and anticipate precisely. Their calm confidence demonstrates that advanced poker is not about chaos. It is about order disguised as spontaneity. Chapter 25. Integrating levels into daily play. Understanding multi-level thinking conceptually is valuable, but true improvement comes from integration. Applying these principles in daily play turns theory into instinct. The goal is not to think deeper in every hand, but to think accurately, aligning your reasoning to each opponent and situation with discipline. Integration begins with awareness. Before each session, set clear mental parameters. Remind yourself to observe patterns, stay calm, and adjust depth based on context. Against recreational players, simplify. Against observant regulars, layer deception. Against professionals, maintain balance and test for adaptability. Structured awareness keeps your thought process intentional. Routine reinforces these habits. Develop a pre-session checklist that centers focus. Review stack depths, note table positions, and visualize calm decision-making. A steady starting rhythm prevents distraction and allows layered thinking to unfold naturally during play. Post-session reflection transforms experience into growth. Review key hands and identify which level of thinking guided each decision. Ask whether deeper thought added clarity or confusion. Over time, you will refine when to expand and when to simplify, building instinctive calibration between logic and perception. Training exercises accelerate integration. Practice assigning ranges to opponents in real time, even in hands you are not playing. Verbally label levels of thought, yours and theirs, until recognition becomes automatic. Consistent repetition strengthens mental mapping skills and stabilizes focus during high-pressure moments. Mindset also determines success. Multi-level thinking requires patience and humility. You must accept uncertainty and adapt without frustration. Professionals embrace error as feedback, using mistakes to refine understanding rather than undermine confidence. Integration is not about memorizing strategy trees, but mastering rhythm. The more consistently you apply layered thought with calm precision, the more natural it feels. Poker then transitions from deliberate calculation to fluent comprehension. When multi-level thinking becomes part of your daily process, your perception expands beyond cards and numbers. You begin reading the emotional tempo of a table, anticipating reactions, and acting from clarity rather than guesswork. Consistency turns insight into habit, and habit into mastery. Chapter 26. Lesson Recap. Multi-level thinking transforms poker from a mechanical contest into a strategic dialogue. It teaches you to interpret the game as layers of perception, each influencing the next. Mastery lies not in thinking infinitely deep, but in thinking one level deeper than the player across from you. We began by defining the structure, level 1 through level 4, and explored how awareness expands with each step. You learned how to recognize when opponents overthink or underthink, and how to calibrate accordingly. We examined how balance, range construction, and timing sustain logical structure. We discussed psychological cues, emotional control, and narrative management, the human elements that give logic meaning. Each layer of perception blends math and psychology into one cohesive system. You also learned how to adapt across formats. In tournaments, leveling shifts with stack pressure and ICM tension. In cash games, depth and repetition create psychological rhythm. Across both, composure remains your anchor. Real-world examples illustrated how elite professionals use these principles intuitively. They manage image, anticipate reaction, and maintain emotional balance, proving that mental clarity under pressure defines success more than complexity of thought. Multi-level thinking is less about intelligence and more about awareness. It is the discipline to control perception, the patience to observe before reacting, and the confidence to simplify when the game becomes chaotic. As you progress, remember that each level is a tool, not a destination. When used deliberately, it builds precision. When used without control, it breeds confusion. Mastery means knowing when to think, when to act, and when to stop thinking altogether. Poker rewards calm minds that see the game as conversation rather than combat. The better you understand what others believe, the more control you have over what happens next.